The first thing to break the silence was the lie. Not a spoken lie, but the lie of a sound where none should be. It came on the tail of the evening breeze, a silver thread of music winding through the cedar-scented air of Elian's workshop. He froze, the carving knife still in his hand, its edge a hair's breadth from the breast of a half-formed wren. For a year, his world had been a muffled space, filled only with the scrape of steel on wood and the hollow beat of his own heart. Music had died with Lyra. Yet, here it was. A flute's melody, faint but clear, dancing with the same whimsical, breathy notes she used to play while he worked. It was the tune Shed composed for the summer solstice, a song of long light and wild honey. His knuckles whitened around the handle of the knife. Grief was a trickster he knew. It conjured ghosts in the peripheral vision, whispered names in the rustle of leaves. But this was different. This wasn't a memory echoing in the architecture of his skull. It was a physical vibration in the air, traveling from the world outside, through the open window, and into him. He set the wren down on the workbench, its wooden eye a blank, unblinking witness. The scent of shaved cedar clung to his clothes, a smell that had once been the perfume of their shared life, now just the dust of his solitude. He moved to the window, his joints stiff, the muscles in his back tight from hours bent over his craft. Outside, the village of Oakhaven was settling into the deep blue of twilight. Lanterns glowed like captured stars in the windows of the cottages nestled in the valley. The melody persisted, a shimmering lure pulling him from the safety of his four walls. It wasn't coming from the village square, nor from the homes of their neighbors. It seemed to emanate from the overgrown path at the edge of his property, the one that led into the shattered copse of ancient oaks, the one that led to the well. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at his skin. No one used that path. No one went to the well anymore. It had been old when his grandfather was a boy, its stone lip worn smooth by a century of hands and ropes, its water long since brackish and still. He stepped out of the workshop and onto the damp earth, the cool night air raising gooseflesh on his arms. The music grew stronger here, purer. He could hear the tiny imperfections, the slight hiss of air as she changed notes, the soft click of a finger on a silver key. Details memory often smoothed away. It was agonizingly, impossibly real. He followed, his feet finding the forgotten path by instinct. Brambles snagged at his trousers, and the damp smell of moss and decay grew thicker, replacing the clean scent of his workshop. The moon, a pale sliver, did little to pierce the canopy of the oaks. Here, the shadows were long and deep, pooling around the base of the trees like black water. The well was just ahead, a darker circle in the gloom. The music seemed to be born from its throat, spilling up into the night. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the flute's serene and impossible song. He reached the edge, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, perpetually damp ground around the stone perimeter. The melody softened, then faded, leaving behind a silence more profound than before. He was alone with the sound of his own ragged breathing. He peered over the edge, into the inky blackness. The air that rose from it was cold, ancient, smelling of wet stone and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood or fallen leaves turned to soil. He waited, listening. Nothing. Fool, he thought, the word a bitter taste in his mouth. An old man chasing the ghosts of his own making. He turned to leave, his shoulders slumping with the weight of a hope he hadn't even known he was carrying. But then it came, not music this time, a whisper. It was not the wind, it was not a trick of the mind, it was a voice, shaped and articulated, rising from the profound dark beneath his feet. It was her voice, stripped of its music, raw and intimate, as if she were standing right behind him, her lips brushing his ear. Elian. The well had been a place of laughter once. He remembered Lyra, her hair the color of spun copper, leaning against its moss-slicked stones, her bare feet dusty from the path. They were young then, their faces unlined, their future an open expanse of sun-drenched fields. They say it's a wishing well, Shed said, her voice bright with the easy magic of youth. Shed tossed a white pebble into its depths, the plink and splash echoing for a surprisingly long time. But I don't think it grants wishes. I think it keeps echoes. Echoes of what Head asked, carving a tiny, intricate leaf into a piece of scrap pine. Of things that are loved very much, Shed answered, her gaze distant, fixed on the dark water. Sounds, feelings, maybe even a little bit of a soul, so they're never truly gone. At the time, it had sounded like one of her beautiful, poetic notions, the kind of fanciful thought that made him love her so fiercely. He hadn't understood it as a premonition. He hadn't understood that one day he would be the one standing at its edge, desperate for any echo at all. Her illness had been a slow thief, stealing her breath first, then her strength, and finally, the music. The flute lay dormant in its velvet-lined case for months before the end. The silence it left behind was a physical presence in their small cottage. After she was gone, the silence grew teeth. It gnawed at the edges of his memories, making them feel thin and brittle. He threw himself into his work, carving birds from dawn until his hands ached, hoping the familiar motions would fill the void shed left. But each finished piece, a sparrow, a finch, a hawk with outstretched wings, felt hollow. They were just wood, lifeless and mute. They couldn't sing. The first year without her was a blur of sawdust and sorrow. The village women would leave casseroles on his doorstep, their sympathy a heavy cloak he didn't want to wear. He offered polite, tired nods when he saw them in the market, his gaze always drifting past them, searching for a flash of copper hair that was no longer there. His life had become a grayscale photograph of what it once was. The whisper from the well was the first intrusion of color. It was a terrifying, vibrant splash of crimson in his world of gray. He had fled that first night, his heart a frantic bird in his chest, stumbling back to the cottage and bolting the door as if a physical thing were pursuing him. He didn't sleep. He sat by the cold hearth, the wooden wren in his hand, replaying the sound of his name in her voice. It was perfect. It was her cadence, her pitch, the soft lilt she gave the last syllable. It was a perfect echo. He told himself it was madness, that the well was just a hole in the ground, its acoustics playing tricks on a lonely mind. But he couldn't shake the sheer, undeniable clarity of the sound. The next day, he was useless in the workshop. His hands trembled. He nicked his thumb with the chisel, watching a bead of his own blood well up, a stark contrast to the pale wood. Every rustle of wind sounded like the start of her name. The world was holding its breath, and he was holding it with it, waiting for dusk. The second night, he went back not with fear, but with a grim, consuming purpose. He carried a lantern, though he knew the way by heart. The small flame cast dancing, distorted shadows that made the familiar oaks look like hunched, skeletal figures. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, a smell Lyra had loved. It felt like a deliberate seduction. As he approached, a figure detached itself from the shadow of the largest oak. It was Mara, the village weaver, her face a web of fine lines, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her husband, Thomas, had been gone for 5 years. "The air grows cold early tonight, Elian," she said, her voice low and steady. Her eyes, dark and knowing, were fixed on him, not on his face, but on the desperate hope he knew must be radiating from him like a fever. "Mara," he acknowledged, his own voice hoarse. "You're out late." "The loom calls for thread," she said, a clear deflection. "And you. The woods call to you." He couldn't form a reply. A lie felt sacrilegious here, and the truth felt like madness. She seemed to understand. Her gaze softened with a pity that made him flinch. "Some things are best left buried," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Echoes are for the dead. The living need silence to heal." She gave him one last, long look, then turned and walked back toward the village, her form dissolving into the gloom. Her warning settled like a cold stone in his gut, but it was too late. The hook was set too deep. He continued to the well, his resolve hardened by her interruption. This was his grief, his memory, his to claim. He set the lantern on the stone lip, its golden light pushing back the oppressive darkness, illuminating the slick, mossy stones and the dark maw of the well. He leaned over, his heart beginning its frantic rhythm. "Lyra," he whispered, the name a pained, rusty thing. For a long moment, there was only the chirping of crickets. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, lanced through him. He had been a fool. Mara was right. Then the whisper came again, rising from the cold depths. "Remember the morning with the finches. The sun on the floorboards." It was more than a name this time. It was a fragment of a memory, a moment so specific, so private, he hadn't thought of it in months. A Sunday morning. Lyra at the kitchen table, her flute disassembled for cleaning, the silver pieces gleaming in a patch of sunlight. A pair of finches had been squabbling on the windowsill, and she had laughed, a sound like wind chimes. The well's voice wasn't just her voice, it was the entire moment distilled into a perfect auditory shard. He could hear the finches, the soft clink of the flute's keys on the wooden table, the low hum of her happiness. He sank to his knees, his hands gripping the cold, damp stone of the well. Tears streamed down his face, hot against his chilled skin. "Yes," he choked out, speaking to the darkness. "I remember," a new whisper answered, eager now. "And the wild strawberries we found by the creek. You said they tasted like a song." He fed at his memories, speaking them aloud into the darkness, and the well gave them back to him, polished and perfect, voiced by the ghost of his wife. He described the day he carved her likeness into the headboard of their bed. The well gave him back the sound of her gasp of delight. He spoke of the winter shed fallen ill. The well gave him back her soft, fevered breathing in the dead of night. His workshop gathered dust. The wooden birds sat on his shelves, half-finished, their wings uncarved, their forms inert. His world shrank until it was nothing but the hours between dusk and dawn and the pilgrimage to that damp, cold circle of stone. He grew gaunt, his face hollowed out, his eyes burning with a feverish light. He was living on echoes, and he was starving. The addiction demanded more. Whispers were no longer enough. The fragments of memory were like crumbs to a starving man, each one sharpening his hunger for the full meal. He needed to be in the memory, not just a listener at its edge. He needed to feel the sun, to taste the strawberries, to hold her hand. The thought became an obsession, a fire in his mind that burned away all reason, all caution, all of Marat's quiet warnings. He knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, what he had to do. He needed to give the well something more than just words. He needed to give it a piece of her. He went to the cedar chest at the foot of their bed, the one he hadn't opened since her passing. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the scent of her rose up to meet him, dreed lavender and old linen. And there, nestled in its worn velvet-lined case, was her flute. He lifted it. The silver was cold and heavy in his trembling hands, tarnished with the absence of her touch. It was the most sacred object he owned, a vessel that had once held her breath, her music, her soul. It was the perfect offering. That night, he walked to the well with the flute case clutched in his hand like a prayer book. The moon was full, bathing the copse in a stark silver light that made the world look like a photograph taken in another time. There was no hesitation in his step. He was a man on his way to a holy sacrament. He knelt at the well's edge, the damp earth seeping through the knees of his trousers. He didn't set up the lantern. The moonlight was enough. He opened the case. The flute gleamed, a sliver of captured moonlight. He held it over the dark opening, the pull of the abyss below a tangible thing. "Lyra," he said, his voice a raw plea, "I want to come home. Just for a moment. Take me back to the solstice, the longest day, the day you played the sun down." He let go. The flute fell, not with a splash, but with a soft, resonant thrum that seemed to be swallowed by the silence before it could end. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. He stared into the void, the awful, crushing weight of his sacrifice pressing down on him. Had he given away the last piece of her for nothing? And then, the world dissolved. It didn't fade, it shattered. The cold, moonlit copse fractured into a million pieces of light, and the sound of rushing wind filled his ears. The feeling was not of falling, but of being unwritten and then written anew. The cold dampness vanished, replaced by a profound, blissful warmth on his skin. The smell of decay was gone, supplanted by the scent of sun-baked earth, wild roses, and the honey-sweet fragrance of Lyra's hair. He was standing, not kneeling by a well, but standing in the wildflower meadow behind their cottage. The sun, a great golden orb, was low in the sky, painting the clouds in hues of orange and rose. And she was there, Lyra, not a whisper, not a memory. She was solid, real, turning to him with a smile that lit her entire being. She wore the white linen dress shed saved for special days, and her copper hair was a fiery halo in the setting sun. "You are daydreaming again, Elian," she said, her voice full and rich, exactly as it had been. She took his hand, and the touch was electric. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the delicate tracery of her veins, the familiar strength in her grip. This wasn't an echo. This was resurrection. He couldn't speak. He could only look at her, drinking in every detail, the tiny freckle beside her left eye, the way she squinted slightly in the golden light, the effortless grace of her posture. The world around them was hyper-real, more vivid than any memory. He could see individual pollen motes dancing in the shafts of light, hear the drone of a specific bee hovering over a clover blossom. She led him to the crest of the hill where they'd laid a blanket. She had her flute in her hands, the flute, pristine and gleaming, and as the sun touched the horizon, she began to play. The solstice song. It wasn't a sound coming from a well, it was music being born into the world right beside him, vibrating through the grass, through the air, through the bones of his body. It was a moment of pure, undiluted joy, so perfect it was painful. And that was when the first crack appeared in the beautiful illusion. As she played, he felt an overwhelming urge, a desperate need to change the script. He knew what was coming. Not tonight, not next month, but in the years that waited just over the horizon of this perfect day, the cough that would start small, the weariness shed dismiss, the slow, inexorable fading of this vibrant light. He opened his mouth to warn her. "Lyra," he tried to say, "we have to see the doctor in the city. To res a shadow, we have to catch it early." But no sound came out. His lips moved, his throat worked, but he was mute. a ghost at his own feast. He tried again, shouting her name in his mind, but the air remained still. She finished her song and turned to him, her eyes shining. "Isn't it beautiful, Elian? I wish this day could last forever." He reached for her, to hold her, to somehow anchor himself in this perfect moment and stop time itself. But as his fingers brushed her arm, her image flickered like a candle flame in a draft. The warmth of her skin was gone, replaced by an icy cold that shot up his arm. The beautiful golden world wavered, its colors bleeding at the edges. The sound of the wind began to sound less like a summer breeze and more like a long, mournful sigh. He looked into her eyes and saw, for the first time, that they were not quite right. They were perfect, yes, but they were vacant. They held the memory of love, but not the active spark. They were reflecting his adoration back at him, but they were not generating any of their own. The well wasn't giving him Lyra, it was a mirror, showing him a flawless reflection of his own memories, his own longing. He was alone in this beautiful room he had built from his own heart, and the realization was 1,000 times more desolate than the simple, honest silence of his empty cottage. The perfection was the cage. "No," he finally managed to rasp, and this time the sound came out, tearing through the fabric of the memory. "This isn't real." The world shattered again. The golden light, the warm air, the sound of her laughter, it all imploded, sucked back into the cold, dark throat of the well. He was on his knees again in the damp, cold earth. The moonlight was harsh now, unforgiving. His hands were scraped raw from where had clawed at the stone lip of the well. A profound, body-racking shiver seized him, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air and everything to do with the void that had just opened inside him. The flute was gone. He had traded the last true piece of her for a perfect, beautiful, soul-crushing lie. He stumbled back from the well, his legs unsteady, and retched into the brambles. There was nothing in his stomach. He was empty. The journey home was a blind, stumbling trek through a nightmare. The cottage, once his sanctuary of grief, now felt alien, contaminated. The perfect, vivid memory from the well had poisoned everything. He looked at the familiar objects, the rocking chair she loved, the loom in the corner where Shed taught him to mend his own shirts, the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the curtains, and they felt like cheap replicas. Pale imitations of the hyper-real world he had just been torn from. His own memories, the real ones, were now suspect. He tried to picture her face, laughing by the fire. Was that a true memory, or was it a detail had just seen in the well's fabrication? The edges were blurred. The genuine, imperfect moments of their life together were now tainted by the sterile perfection of the echo. The well hadn't just taken the flute, it had taken the authenticity of his own past. He staggered into his workshop and collapsed onto the stool, his head in his hands. The air was thick with the smell of cedar, but it no longer brought comfort. It smelled like a coffin. On the workbench, the half-finished wren sat where he had left it. He picked it up, its smooth, cool wood, a stark contrast to the phantom warmth of Lyra's hand. He saw it now for what it was, an attempt to capture life in a lifeless medium, an echo, just like the well. He had spent a year trying to carve a perfect memory of a bird, and the well had offered him a perfect memory of his wife. Both were traps. Both were beautiful, intricate cages that kept him from the messy, imperfect, and necessary business of living. The silence in the cottage before had been an absence, a space waiting to be filled. The silence now was a roaring, malevolent presence. It was the sound of the well, having feasted on his most sacred memory, now sitting in the dark, waiting. He had not been healed. He had been hollowed out. Days bled into one another in a gray haze. Elian did not return to the well, but its presence was a constant, psychic pressure at the edge of the village. He felt it like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. He stopped carving. The tools on his workbench lay untouched, gathering a fine layer of dust. What was the point? He could never create something as flawlessly real as the illusion the well had shown him, and he now saw the folly in even trying. The true consequence of his night at the well revealed itself not in his own solitude, but in the changes to the night itself. The whispers were no longer just for him. One evening, as he sat listlessly by his window, he saw old Fenrir, the farmer whose son had been lost to the winter fever a decade ago, walking with a strange, determined gait toward the oak copse. The next morning, Fenrir's eyes were distant and glassy, his movements slow, as if he were walking in a dream. Then it was Anya, the baker's young wife, whose husband had been taken by the sea 2 years prior. She began neglecting the ovens, and the morning bread went unmade. The well was awake. His desperate, powerful grief had been the catalyst, a feast that had given it the strength to call to others. It was no longer just his personal demon, it was a blight spreading through the heart of Oakhaven. The air in the village grew heavy with unspoken sorrows. People moved with their shoulders hunched, their gazes turned inward, listening for a call only they could hear. A knock on his door startled him from his stupor. It was Mara. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and closing the door firmly behind her. Her face was grim, her dark eyes missing their usual spark of weary pity. They held a hard, brittle anger. "You fed it, didn't you?" she said, her voice low and accusatory. "You gave it something precious." Elian couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the floorboards, at a patch of sunlight that reminded him so painfully of the well's lie. "I don't," she cut him off. "I hear it too now." Faintly, Thomas' voice. "It hasn't called to me in years, not since the first winter after he was gone. I was strong enough to turn away then. But you've made it stronger. It's hungry." He finally looked at her, his own guilt a physical sickness in his gut. "What is it, Mara? What is that place?" She sank into the rocking chair, the wood groaning under her weight. "It's a wound," she said, her gaze lost in the middle distance. "A wound in the world that never healed. It doesn't give you back the dead, Elian. It takes what's left of them from the living. It consumes memory. It lives on sorrow. It offers a sweet, perfect poison that preserves the wound forever so it can feed." The irreversible truth of her words settled over him. He had thought his bargain with the well was a private tragedy. He saw now that his grief had been selfish, his desperation a key that had unlocked a cage, loosing a predator upon his neighbors. He had wanted to escape his own pain, and in doing so, he had amplified the pain of his entire community. His sorrow was no longer just his own, it had become a contagion. He had a responsibility, not just to Lyra's memory, but to the living. Destruction was the first impulse. To take a sledgehammer to the ancient stones, to fill the dark maw with rubble and earth until it was choked silent. But Elian knew, with a deep intuitive certainty, that one does not heal a wound by striking it. The well was not a thing of stone and water, it was a place of spirit, of memory. To attack it with brute force would be like trying to fight a shadow with a sword. It would only make the darkness deeper. He had to choose a different path. Not of destruction, but of acceptance, of guardianship. He returned to his workshop for the first time in weeks. The familiar scent of cedar felt different, not a reminder of loss, but a scent of creation, of purpose. He ran his hand over the dusty tools, the cool metal a grounding force. He picked up the half-finished wren. Its form was stiff, lifeless, an icon of his arrested grief. He had tried to carve a perfect bird, a monument, but Lyra had not been